Hello, it's me, Ian Bowman, and I want to talk about modes. And to understand modes in music, we first need to understand scales. And a scale is just an organized collection of tones. Now, you'll hear people talk about major scales and minor scales and pentatonic scales and microtonal scales, and these are all just different ways of organizing sound into structure. And I'm going to talk about scales as they apply to Western music, which uses the 12-tone system. And a mode in music is just a scale with an intended starting note or root. So for example, the major scale, which is one of the most commonly used scales in Western music, it has 7 notes and 7 different modes. And they're used so commonly that the modes have their own names. First mode is called the Ionian mode. Then the Dorian mode. The Phrygian mode. Lydian. Mixolydian. Aeolian. And Locrian. And we use modes all the time in music. In jazz music, for example, there's a style of jazz called modal jazz. And this stays on the same chord for an extended period of time. And that allows the improviser to explore different melodic shapes in the mode that applies to that chord, and also to weave in and out of the confines of that mode for the sake of musical expression. And we also use modes when we're talking about songs with functional harmony, chords that move more quickly in a shorter amount of time. And these modes give us a greater context for the chords as they happen. And when we're improvising, it gives us an idea of what notes will sound good over which chords. And again, any collection of notes is a scale, and any scale has modes, but there are certain types of scales that pop up more frequently than others. For example, diatonic scales are scales that have 7 notes and have each letter represented exactly once. So the major scale is an example of a diatonic scale. The C major scale is C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Every letter is represented exactly one time. And there are other types of diatonic scales as well. In jazz music, we talk a lot about the modes of the ascending melodic minor scale. And these modes can be really useful, especially when talking about altered dominant theory and things like that. There are other types of diatonic modes as well, like the harmonic minor scale, which I think is really interesting because it gives you a lot of kind of interesting shapes when you go through the different modes. Now, outside the world of diatonic scales, there are pentatonic scales, which generally speaking are scales that consist of 5 notes. But specifically, when people talk about pentatonic scales, they're usually talking about the modes of the pentatonic scale derived from ancient Chinese music. And there's an old Chinese legend about some dude that found a bunch of bamboo rods and he cut them into the same ratio of decreasing length, and he got a sequence of 5 notes, each a fifth higher than the last. Sounds like this. And if you organize these, if you condense them down into a single octave, it sounds like this. And so you have 5 different modes of that scale. And we use these modes all the time in Western music as well. Now there's a special type of scale which Messiaen called modes of limited transposition, which I like to call symmetrical scales. And these are scales that have a certain number of points of symmetry within the scale itself. A common example of this is what's called the diminished scale, which is constructed by alternating a whole step and then a half step all the way up. It sounds like this. And so if you go through the modes of that, the second mode is a half step and then a whole step. And then the third mode has the same notes and the same modality as the first mode, meaning it has the same structure of half steps and whole steps. And this is because of the points of symmetry within the scale. Even though it's an 8-note scale, it only has 2 distinct modes, which is why Miss Aon called them modes of limited transposition, because a G diminished scale has all the same notes as a B flat diminished scale, all the same notes as a D flat diminished scale. And there are all kinds of scales that do or do not fall into the categories that I just mentioned. And in the future, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite modes and giving examples of things that you can play over those modes and some fun melodic shapes that you can find within those modes. And until then, thanks for watching. This is Ian Bowman, and have a great day, and good luck out there. It's a crazy world. All right, goodbye.